COVID-19. This conversation is being hosted by the Trade and Economic Development Unit, TEDU for short, at the University of the West Indies. For some time, the TEDU has been using its national conversation platform as a forum to facilitate engagement between experts on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. The objective of these conversations is to ensure that the public is informed of critical information on and analysis of the economy in a timely manner. To quote Warren Buffett, "You only find out who is swimming naked when the tide goes out." And ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has caused the proverbial tide to go out for economies around the world, as well as for us in Trinidad and Tobago. An over-reliance on the energy sector, an underdeveloped non-energy export sector, and imprudent spending has led to the Trinidad and Tobago economy struggling to cope with the additional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In light of this economic reality, how should we respond? How do we retool our economy to safeguard our economic future? We will hear from this evening's panelists to find out. On this evening's panel, we have Dr. Buendranath Tiwari, former Minister of Planning and the former Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Ms. Denise Deming, Communications Strategist, Political Commentator and Event Planner, Dr. Kirk Megu, Political Economist, Author, Broadcaster and Speaker, and Mr. Mariano Brown, former Minister in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Brown is running a bit late, so he will join the conversation a bit later on this evening. Just a couple of meeting announcements. First, please ensure that your microphones are muted when you are not speaking to prevent feedback. Second, please note that this session is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. This evening's conversation will proceed as follows. We will begin with a contribution by Dr. Buendranath Tiwari, followed by contributions from Ms. Denise Deming, Dr. Kirk Megu, and Mr. Mariano Brown. Then we will invite questions and comments from you, our audience, either verbally or using the Zoom chat feature. Thank you. And now we'd like to invite Dr. Buendranath Tiwari to give his opening contribution. Dr. Tiwari. Oh, excuse me, Dr. Tiwari, your mic you're still muted.
How is that?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd said it before, but clearly my mic was muted. So I want to say hello to Denise and to Kirk and to you, moderator, and to Rebecca, who was here. And I want to thank TEDU and Dr. Hussein for making this possible and giving me an opportunity to share my views and to collaborate with these very worthwhile people on the panel. You'll have to stop me as I go. I don't know how much time I have, but what I'm going to try to do in this initial part is to talk a little bit about the world economy, to talk a little bit about Trinidad and Tobago's development and its people, to talk about some of the issues identified in Budget 2021 as a kind of policy and strategy document. And if I have more time, I will develop some things from there. I imagine you are going to stop me about that time. But as far as the world economy is concerned, we are dealing with a sea change in the world that is taking place because of this health crisis. And I think all of us are aware of that. As you yourself says, quoting from Warren Buffett, we have all been sort of found naked in this situation where the tide has gone out. So we are all faced with what is essentially an emerging digital economy, with digital connectivity demanding digital learning. And I think every country at different levels and scales is having to deal with that at some point. I think secondly, we are dealing with an economy that we think will recover once the vaccine is distributed. Some say by 2022, the Minister of Finance says about 2022. some say perhaps later, which is going to be restructuring as it recovers. Even now, the world economy is restructuring. And that will require, in this new situation, different kinds of communication skills and advocacy skills from all the individuals involved in it, whether they are in government, whether they are in private sector business, whether they are in NGOs, whether they are in trade unions. The whole communication landscape, I think, and the advocacy framework is going to change. Thirdly, even while this is happening, climate change is a reality and it is intensifying, it is not receding. And that requires human and economic action now and in the future. Fourthly, sustainable development, what can I say, has been challenged because of what COVID has done and the revelations that it has made about inequity, inequality, and vulnerability on a scale perhaps that we did not understand and appreciate before. I think all of this new framework is going to require entrepreneurship, but a different kind of entrepreneurship, what you might call a solutions entrepreneurship for very different economy, very altered markets, very restructured value chains, and very realigned logistical arrangements that are, again, realigned to geopolitical changes and realities and currents already in motion. I think also, as everything else, this is going to require innovation for a more unknown world and a very reprioritized agenda. And I think that some of that is going to require very, very creative solutions, not just solution entrepreneurship and solution orientation, but very creative solutions. And it's going to require social entrepreneurship and social innovation. I think these things are going to become more important. In order to engage in these kinds of things, all the things that I've mentioned, you need critical thinking. This is a country that has missed the opportunity to engage in critical thinking or to take it seriously or to see it as a value on which you need to build a number of conversations and discussion. Because critical thinking questions the world as it is, and it seeks to create the foundations for something else. And in this environment, we will have to seek the foundations for a new world order. I think this is going to lead to some ideological rethinking that is already happening. The issue of wealth distribution and unbridled growth has come into question by thoughtful economists. The issue of limits to consumer demand and unbridled growth had come into question even before COVID. The issue of equity, inequality, social and political stability, and the problems that they may pose, and the fact that you cannot look at economics without the society, the polity, etc. I think that is becoming clearer. That because if you have vulnerability in one country, it is going to impact on the vulnerabilities of other countries, because pretty soon it is going to get to your shores. The issue of sustainability of society, I think people are going to have to think about that harder. The issue of sustainability of the planet, I think that will become a pressing issue. The issue of quality of life and the meaning of life for the human race, given this experience that we are going through with COVID and what it implies really for the value system to which we adhere or that is meaningful to us. And then finally, that is going to demand that we look at the issue of talent wherever it exists, in whatever form, creativity and creation capacity wherever it exists and whatever form. And we are going to need a lot of empathy in redesigning society. I think that is going to demand, I belong for many, many years to the World Future Society. And I think it's going to demand what you might call some futures literacy. It's going to demand anticipatory capacity. The issue of systems thinking had always been an issue in demand, but people did not take it seriously. They feel that you could deal with things in silos and get along, but I don't think you can get away with it anymore. Strategic foresighting, which is a very important thing, the management of risk, which we've come to see as paramount, and as I said, the creative thinking, innovation at the level of thought and ideas and concepts and solution action. These things are going to become very important. I think this is going to be a world system in transformation in these things. And I think the smart societies are going to be the ones that get these right for their purposes, whether they are small societies or large societies. So if you are a little island and you get it right, you can solve a lot of your own problems. If you are a big country and you get it right, that can make a difference in the way you see the world and the way you act in the world. Trinidad and Tobago has a population size, according to the 2011 census, of 1.32 million. When you look at the movement of the population, what we are seeing are dwindling cities and the rise of other centers. And that means implications for planning, housing, and job generation. Let me just give you an example. The Port of Spain, for instance, according to the 2011 census, has now 37,000 people. San Fernando has 48, and it has, both of these cities have declined since 2000, between 2000 and 2011. I don't know what the 2021 or 22 census will say, but this gives us a good example. Borough of Arima has remained the same, 33,000 approximately. But what has been growing? Borough of Chaguanas from 67 to 83. Kuva Tabaki, that has declined from 162 to 89. So that is something else we can take into account. Diego Martin has grown from 105 to 178,000. Then you have Mayaro, Rio Claro growing from 32,000 to 102,000. And so on, we can go on. Sawa Lavantil has dwindled a little bit from 157 to 102. So I think that planning for the country in the context of this pandemic, if we are going to do it right, we have to plan differently. We have to think differently. We have to organize our business differently. So we need to look at what is happening in these places and plan in relation to that and decide where we are going to put the housing, where we're going to put the jobs, whether we are going to replenish Port of Spain as a city, whether we are going to deal, for instance, with those growth centers as new centers of growth and how we are going to deal with it. The other thing is the ages. You have about 180,000 people who are over 60, 260,000 who are between 45 and 60, 410,000 between 25 and 45, 215,000 between, these are rough figures, between 15 and 25, and under 14, about 270,000, with a birth rate of about $20,000 people per year. And you have regional disparities in terms of economic sustainability and social support systems across the country. So Point Fortin is very different from Arima. Arima is very different from Port of Spain. That is very different from Mayaro, Rio Claro, etc. So what this tells me is that you need to have an emphasis on what you might call geospatial economics. You can't deal with economics alone anymore. For a little country like this, you have to deal with the realities of geospatial economics. And you also need to deal with the issue of the poverty, which is a reality. You have about 300,000 poor. You have 75,000 poor households. All of this is before COVID. You need to deal with the issue of poverty eradication. That requires social support. It requires income generating ideas and projects and individual assignment or linkages. You need education and skills. You need people channeled to jobs, income, business, and self-sufficiency. You need community support for life and community skills. But you are dealing with not a large number, 75,000 households, 300,000 poor. It is manageable if you have a serious project. And when you think this is spread out over the various regions in the country, so that in each region it would be manageable. And if you understand that each region has more or less infrastructure for supporting these things, then the way of addressing this is very important. And I think that how you think about the problem, how you frame the problem, is going to be critical also. I think this also raises the issue about inward migration, and we need to do some critical thinking about this. Right now, we have the Venezuelan situation. We have increased migration from a number of areas from Africa to the Caribbean, and we need to begin to see now how that fits into a strategy for sustainable development. And we need to also address the issue of what kind of GDP growth we are looking for. And for a small society like ours, in what is essentially going to be a digital world. So I'm saying that we've got to use this COVID situation to look at Trinidad and Tobago in the context of people development, community development, regional development, national development in the context of an emerging digital global economy. And therefore, we have got to begin to re-strategize for that. When you look at budget 2021, I don't know if Mr. Imbert realizes this, but he talks about property tax. And you need an institution that will manage that. He talks about revenue collections. He talks about the revenue authority. But let's say we don't end up with the revenue authority. We still have to collect taxes. We have an institution now. It might be more complex later. If you're dealing with revenue collections, you have to deal with an institution. If you're dealing with gaming commissions, you have to deal with an institution. If you're dealing with National Statistical Institute, all of us know the sorry state in which that institution is now, the CSO. So if you're dealing with that, you're dealing with institution. You're dealing with National Insurance Board, that is institution. You're dealing with procurement, which has not yet got off the ground after 6 years, then that also requires institution. But the thing about these 6 institutions that are mentioned in here, all of them mentioned in this budget, is that they require to be able to function effectively independent professionals in institutions insulated from any political directorate, no matter who that political directorate happens to be. Now, when you look at the last 20 years of education, higher education in this country, we have had on average about 4,000 university graduates every year. That is about 80,000 graduates from the system. Each one of them, if you take the oldest graduating, let's say in 2000, he or she is going to be 45 years old today. So a pool of 80,000 graduates, 45 years and younger, is a substantial pool from which you can draw and build. And if you want to build these institutions that are independent, that have integrity, that will support sustainability as we go forward, that will be apolitical in terms of its thinking, because you need that in order to plan, organize, etc. Then it seems to me that there are certain things that we need to do for planning for the skills that we need going forward, and the training methodologies and mechanisms that we need, given that they are graduates, given that the training you need is not university education now. We need to think of what we might do to get all of these independent institutions and all these independent professional people to populate these institutions that have to be independent if we are to have a society. So I would close on these 6 points very quick. We need to rethink education. We need to rethink housing. Housing is a whole other issue because that is going to come up, and I want to mention 2 things in housing. We have to have housing that is sustainable, not just in community, but in terms of rainwater harvesting, in terms of solar power, all of these things. But more than that, given where we live in the Caribbean, what's happening with climate change, it has to be resistant to all those forces that assault us from time to time as the weather pattern changes during the course of any year, including earthquakes and, of course, all the storms of various kinds that we get. We need to rethink population and migration issues. How much people do you need? At what level of skill? Configured in what formulations that will allow you to achieve a GDP of what, with a quality of life of what, spread over the country with a certain amount of equity and reasonableness. In what way? I think we need to do that. We need to rethink the health sector now that we have had the experience of COVID. We know the limitations of our own sector. We have public and private, and we know the adjustments that we've had to make given the facilities that were available, like Hoover Hospital, Cora Hospital, the other institute, the southern campus of the University of the West Indies. So we need to rethink the health sector. We need to rethink safety and security. We cannot continue in this way. We have to use COVID to rethink these things. We need to rethink energy education. For instance, with digital education, with online education, with Guyana and Suriname being the big players in the region, in addition to others, but they are the dominant ones emerging now. Perhaps energy education could be one of Trinidad and Tobago's tertiary level education's main exports. And 6, we need to rethink economic strategy for restructuring for sustainability. It's a digital-driven world that we are entering, in which artificial intelligence is going to be key. And while we do all the things here, don't feel that I'm dissing the things that are basic, because I have ideas on that which I will share. We must do agriculture, of course, and we must be self-sufficient. We must save the foreign exchange. We must produce the food. We must make the linkages, all of that. But we need to rethink the economic strategy. And what do we need to do that would address the issue of self-sufficiency? What do we need to do that will address the issue of self-sustainability as an island nation? And what do we need to do that will address the issue of connectivity with the rest of the world, and therefore growth that allows us to compete in the world and to play a role in the world as we become better and better in terms of the economic opportunities we give the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago here in Trinidad and Tobago. That would be my framework. That would be my introduction. And I would be happy to get any responses, any differences in point of view, or any alternative points of view. I want to thank you very much, moderator, for the opportunity to share this with you this evening.
You're very welcome, Dr. Tiwari. Thank you very much for your contribution. Next, I'd like to invite Ms. Denise Deming to give her contribution. Ms. Deming.
Thank you very much, and good evening. And when I contemplated this topic, I felt that it was absolutely impossible because Trinidad and Tobago didn't have a plan pre-COVID. So to talk about a plan post-COVID, to me, is a moot point. We've been floating on oil and gas for far too long. So we've lost our legs to be able to float on anything else. Dr. Tiwari talked a lot about digitization and AI and that strategy in which how are we going to connect with the rest of the world. He talked about connectivity. I want to give you an irony of this evening. I am operating on the basis of my phone being a hotspot because the internet is not working. That is a clear indication of the extent to which we are not prepared for even today. Dr. Tiwari talked about conservation, which is clear that if there are 3 areas we need to look at, one is digitization, and that has been in the PNM's manifesto since 2010, and I don't think it has moved very far along in terms of its development. But he went on to talk about conservation, and conservation is extremely important. We're an island economy, and the issue of conservation is just not on our agenda, despite the chat that we have, and despite all kinds of things. And here's the evidence that I would put forward to say that conservation is just not on our agenda, despite our vulnerability. When you think of, I run a lot, people who know that I run slowly. So, and when you're running, you're really, there isn't very much else that you can do. So you think and you look around. So I do things like count manholes, count bad pavement covers, count plastic that I see on the side of the road. And every time I have gone out to run, I have counted no less than 50 bottles, empty plastic bottles. And I will say it, I'll call it out. It's generally Blue Waters, and the other popular water is Dasani. Now, you may ask yourself, why is that relevant? That is absolutely relevant because Wassa water is good. We have not had a waterborne disease in this country forever. We've not had one. But we have allowed plastics to dominate our water needs so that a poor family will go into the supermarket and they'll buy a case of water before they open their taps or whatever they get their water and drink the Wassa water. Now that is not sustainable. So if we're talking about conservation, that's one of the things that we have to do. I'll give you a second example with regard to conservation. There is an organization in which it has 3 words: conservation, environment, and protection. That organization employs 10,000 people. Those 10,000 people cut grass, put it in bags, and send it to the dump. After 15 to 20 years in existence, that organization has not worked out how could we recycle those clippings so that the clippings can nourish the soil. So we clearly are we're not there in terms of conservation. The third area that I think we need to be looking at is, and Dr. Tiwari talked about the foreign exchange crunch we are likely to experience, is repair and restoration. We have to focus a lot on repair and restoration, and particularly automobiles. You look at what Cuba did with automobiles since in the 50s and 60s, but we continue to try to buy new automobiles as opposed to structuring and regularizing the pavement mechanic and ensuring that they can repair and restore. So those are three kinds of retooling areas that we ought to be looking at. But I want to say that none of this will work. None of what Dr. Tiwari has said will work. And Dr. Tiwari, I'm saying that in all recognition of the substance of what you've said. It has a lot of substance, a lot of thought. There's a lot of stuff there about critical thinking and systems thinking and so on. But we will not move from where we are until there's a collective behind the vision of the country. I don't know what the vision of the country is. If we are to change the attitude of the Trinidadian, that Trinidadian has to be part of, and the Trinidadian and Tobagonian, just for people who think that I'm referring only to Trinidad, I mean Trinidadian and Tobagonian, we have to be part of creating that vision. So it has to be part of a collective. Unless we are part of that vision, we will not be engaged. If you want to have better schools, you have to invest in people. If you want to have better systems, you have to invest in people. If you want to have better healthcare, you have to invest in people. And when I talk about investing in people, I mean we have to start to be one country. We have to get rid of the us and them. We have to get rid of the racial bogey that is rattled continuously and that causes us to see each other as enemies. Now, there's another area that Dr. Tiwari did not raise, but I have an interest in, and I've been looking at it for a very long time. And that is the area of, and some people may say that I'm narrow focused, but I don't think I am. That is the area of Carnival, which we have said will not happen in 2021. Why am I focusing on Carnival? Because Carnival brings out the energy in at least 350,000 people directly, and it impacts the rest of the country indirectly. If you look at Carnival, it is goal-oriented, so people know what the goal is. People is highly productive because people have to produce in order to satisfy that goal, and people can measure their participation in it. And when you tease out Carnival a little more and you ask yourself about the steel bands, I think that the steel band, and it's not that I think, I've observed it several times, the steel band presents us with an opportunity to learn. In a very short time, they are highly motivated. They have a goal. They're highly structured. If you go into a panyard, they are highly structured. The captains or the heads of the sections learn the tune, they teach it to their people. And then it comes back through the heads of the sections and back up to the captain. So they're structured. They have relevant skills. They have community. They take care of each other. And of course, they're highly creative. And you may be saying, Denise, I don't know the road you're going down with that. And the road I'm going down with that is simply that we need to learn from the things that inspire and motivate us. And Steel Band and Carnival is one of those things that inspire and motivate us. So we need to find the synergies and find the ways to translate those things into the broader community and into our broader lives. In a post-COVID world, I see a real negative place, but it's a place from which our creativity can pull us. Now, I've talked about Carnival, I've talked about steel bands and so on. I want to talk about one more thing. And that is, it's a line that has resonated with me from a calypso. Voice sang, when the Trini reach in the place is niceness. And when you think of carnivals and you think of Trinidadians, wherever we are, you see the niceness being exhibited. So for example, the president of Howard is a Trini. How is it that he at Howard could create what he's doing? He can make the improvements that he's making. And right now, Howard is an online university under the COVID situation. How is it that can happen there? But when we're in Trinidad, we do not validate each other. We do not bring the niceness to each other, but we bring the niceness to foreign places. And, you know, I think that that goes back to a place that is unfortunate, that our leaders do not demonstrate their love for us. They do not demonstrate their respect for the people. And you may be saying that I'm talking a very soft talk, but I'm saying that the only way we will come out of this COVID situation is that we have to accept that COVID, there's no new normal. COVID is with us for a long time. We have to learn to live with it. We will have issues with foreign exchange. So we have to be able to feed ourselves. And most importantly, we have to be able to care about each other. So if we want to realize the fullness of the potential of our people, we have to invest in them. If we want better technology, we have to invest in our people. If we want better schools, we have to invest in our people. If we want to lower the crime, we have to invest in our people. We need to stop the tactics and these lofty goals and get back to the basics and ask ourselves, how can we care for our communities? How can we care for our environment? How can we survive on less? Because at the moment, a lot of us are struggling and there is no reach out in terms of mental health, in terms of wellness, or any of those things. We continue to talk about things like we're going to bring back the property tax and stuff like that, you know, because we are no longer floating on oil and gas. We are actually sinking on it. And that's my contribution for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Ms. Deming. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Kirk Megu to give his contribution. Dr. Megu.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, and my fellow presenters, Dr. Tiwari, Ms. Deming. Thank you for your presentation. What I would do is sort of give my additions, because I don't disagree with anything that was said before. I fully and wholly endorse it, and I will add some dimensions to it. And the way I want to do that is perhaps by looking at two dimensions. One is a sort of global structural dimension, and the other is the personal dimension. So from us as people living in an economy, having to make a living in this time at the personal level, and then just thinking about the way the whole system in which we have to make that living is going to be done. And if you notice, I'm skipping the national budget level. That would take us, I'm very critical of the budget, right? But I'm not going to deal with that right now in this presentation, right? But so let's talk about at the global level. And one thing I want to endorse, a couple of things I want to emphasize and endorse from Dr. Tiwari's presentation is that we are undergoing a global systemic transformation, absolutely, right? And it requires critical thinking, absolutely. One thing about this critical thinking is that we have to wonder how and why this happens. Because this historic crash of the global economy, which may be, I mean, we don't have the figures yet, but everybody projects that it's going to be worse than the Great Depression. So therefore, the greatest in living recorded history. This is, in my view, fully self-inflicted. We shut down the world economy, or those in control shut down the world economy for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. Any economic planner would know if you shut down the cruise ship industry or the airlines for 8 months, you are going to destroy it. What does that do for things like famine or all sorts of industries and business? So in a sense, it was purposely shut down. It was done as a calculated risk, if you want to put it that way. But for whatever reason, this was done with the knowledge of anybody who has any forecasting sense. So that's just something to think about. But I want to say that we here have uncritically accepted a lot of these things, right? I just reviewed a paper. I was asked to write a paper by the Commonwealth, by the Commonwealth in London on reviewing the COVID situation in the Caribbean, and I talked about how, and this was some months ago, so it was just a couple of months into the crisis, and I was saying this is not actually, from the statistics, a health crisis but it certainly is going to be an economic one that we'll have to face. For the Island Studies Journal, which is a global journal based in Canada about island economies all around the world, island societies, I just reviewed a piece of somebody writing about the other Caribbean islands and also islands in general. And every island society in the world, actually, whether it be in the Caribbean, which I think many of us would have seen the figures, which I did compile about the low rates here compared to many places. But whether it's in the Pacific, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in the Indian Ocean, island societies all around the world have had very similar low infection and death rates in particular. So yet we uncritically accepted this policy as if it were relevant to our situation. We accepted the fear mongering, we accepted all these things. And so, we have really shot ourselves in the foot because we did not use critical thinking. We are just blindly following, like you're not supposed to question what the WHO says or any other organization. Right? And I think this is part of our colonial legacy as well as a whole bunch of other things. But so I wanted to put that up. Now, despite my disagreement and I think the terrible thing which we've done to the global economy and our economy with these lockdowns, on the other hand, we've been able to conduct a radical experiment which may cost a lot of people real harm. But many of us who've been radically trying to rethink the world economy and have said, the way we do things are inefficient. Businesses are finding out, yes, making people go into a city center, spend 2 hours commuting to work and coming back is actually inefficient. People are actually more efficient working from home. Maybe we don't have to rent all these huge buildings in Manhattan, New York now. Most of those buildings in New York are now unoccupied, and many employers don't want their workers to come back. They find it better. So how many decades have we been talking about decentralization in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, now we kind of have it. Traffic is much better. People are productive. We're working. So we're able to finally at least think about these things. Schooling. Is this an efficient way of delivering schooling the way we've done it? My son says he learns much better at home. Right? I know many children that say that as well. They like it much better. And perhaps the education system now can start to change as well. It's sad that we have to do this to realize these things that people have been saying for decades, but that's the way that goes. So that's one thing. Now, before the COVID had hit, with the rise of nationalism around the world, economic nationalism and otherwise, the vertical production chains, which had defined the globalization period from the 1990s. So in other words, what I mean by that is, people producing components into a globally integrated production chain. So Apple, one component done in China, another one done in South Korea, something done in America, and then it gets sold as Apple, and the multinational corporation in the United States makes the profit and so forth. This vertical integrated system of production, which defined the global economy from the 1990s, but for us in the Caribbean has been part of our existence. This is why we were created as sugar colonies, integrated into that structure, and as an oil and gas economy in Trinidad, we also were just producing raw materials, what Lloyd Best and Carrie Levitt called in the plantation model economy, the Muscovado bias, meaning we produce low value added raw products, put it into a production chain where people abroad make the big money. Even in oil and gas, it's the same thing, right? we don't actually produce oil and gas. BP produces oil and gas here. Right? That's not us. That's BPTT. We may get royalties from it. And you know, the other day, someone was telling me a story which I found very impactful. Many of us who talk about the economy and the Trinidad and Tobago economy boast about how, you know, we're the largest exporter of methanol in the world since the 1990s or so, or 2000s at least. Definitely, I think in the 1990s. And someone was giving that presentation abroad, and one of the consultants or whoever was in the audience, a small meeting, was laughing at that. And so the Trinidadian person who was telling me the story said, he wanted to know, well, you know, what's so funny? He said, you know why you're the #1 exporter of methanol in the world? Because nobody exports methanol, right? People make things with methanol and they export those products. They don't export the raw product. I didn't double check to see the facts of that, but it's an apocryphal story about how we merely export. You know, there have been people who have talked about, you know, visionary plans about the Middle East and so forth. And you know, they've been talking, an idea there is, you know, if you have nuclear power in the Middle East, and you can turn a $50 barrel of oil into a $500 barrel of oil if you use it as an industrial feedstock, and you don't burn it, right? But the whole point that I'm saying there is that this system of vertical integration, which defined globalization throughout the world after the 1990s in particular, the economic nationalism that was coming up in the United States through Donald Trump and through in other countries around the world and in Europe and elsewhere, they were finding that you know, the deindustrialization that was happening there, the wealth inequality, the gouging out of the middle class, they wanted to stop it and start to bring production home. With COVID, that was kind of ramped up. Some of it is a political kind of attack, if you want to say, on China. So there's something called the Quad in Asia now. So India, Japan, Australia, I'm missing a country, there's supposed to be 4 countries, are now trying to do independent production chains outside of China, right? Donald Trump was talking about that in terms of getting gear from China, testing kits. No, let's bring our production home. So what I'm saying is that a lot of these globally integrated, vertically integrated production chains are now closing off. And with travel being severely dampened, that whole type of globalization, which I would call imperial globalization, is dying down now. And COVID, I think, is going to accelerate that. We have been locked into that process. That may affect us very much if we only think of providing a raw material into somebody else's production chain. So this is why at least, you know, now the PNM is talking about agricultural production, which both Denise and Bo have talked about. You know, that's great, bringing production capacity here, not just exporting raw materials and getting some income from it. So we are going to have to do that more here. We may be forced to do it, but I'm sorry, ever since the 1960s, our radical economists from the New World Group, Lloyd Best and Havelock Brewster and Norman Gibbon, they've always been talking about this. Maybe this is the radical push we need there. So that's on the structural side, the global side. Now as individuals. And again, as Denise spoke about, you know, our readiness, how she had to use her phone as a mobile hotspot. You know, we are now so dependent on these technological platforms. But I'll give you my own personal story, because for the past few years, I have had to do that to earn my personal living. I've had to do business with people outside of the country, and I've been using Zoom for years now. And now everybody's getting to know Zoom. So for me, actually, it's better. And I'm making more money now because more people are open to interacting with me on Zoom than before. And so there are a lot of opportunities for us now. And I think people are seeing it. People have been using Facebook and social media for political discussion, sharing memes and jokes, but I don't know that we have actually used it to its fullest extent as a global, not only national, like thank God now you could order your pizza, order your food online. Uber has been a big thing abroad, but not really down here. We're now forced to be doing this, and that's actually a good thing. I think it will increase our economic activity, but hopefully with the lockdown release. But that means also that because everybody here does not have to be in Trinidad. We probably are all in Trinidad, or 90%. But anybody could be anywhere. I've participated in umpteen of these things where people are from every corner of the world, and we could be doing that. We could have been selling places perhaps to a virtual summit and make this a virtual summit. That's actually something I'm working on with people in India and San Francisco as well. Because it doesn't matter. Right now, I can't see the person in Port of Spain or Cuba anyways because of social distancing. The technology is forcing us to do this. So we have an opportunity to earn our own US currency, because now, we talk about diversification, and one of the most important things about diversification is diversifying our source of US funds. And I'm actually able to, I'm paid about maybe a third to half of my income sometimes, depending, is in US currency from abroad because I'm using these platforms. And I think more and more and more people will be open to this and forced to do it. I think that's very important. However, we do get into the imperial aspects as well, because even the platforms, who owns the platforms, right? For instance, one of the biggest things in e-commerce, one of the biggest components is PayPal. But if anybody here has ever tried to use PayPal, we are kind of discriminated against in Trinidad and Tobago. It has to be a Visa card. They won't go put it in your bank account. You have to wait 30 days for it to clear, all sorts of things. And then sometimes they won't allow you. And many of these online credit card processing platforms or payment platforms actually blank Trinidad outright. So we do need to find those solutions as well. It's because we don't control it, and many of those companies don't really bother with us. But we do have to participate in that. But despite my disagreement with this whole lockdown policy and whatnot, it is giving us opportunities to create more here, finished products as well. For us as individuals to engage with the world, not only Trinidad, and the world is our market, we can earn foreign exchange more. So, and where we don't have the skills, we need skills, and I'm sort of doing that right now myself, giving classes to people to help use these platforms. But that's my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Dr. Megu. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Mariano Brown to give his contribution. Mr. Brown.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for my fellow panelists. Well, first of all, there's a lot has been said about retooling and what needs to be rethought of and so on. I don't have any general disagreement with it. And the interesting thing is, in terms the point that made by Denise, Mrs. Deming, with respect to one of the nice people, why was Trinidad able to do what he is doing in the United States? It's not been done here. Just to let Ms. Deming know that certainly at the business school, and I think certainly at UWI as well, many schools. All our classes are online. At any one stage of the game, we have about a minimum of 100 students during the course of the day, and anywhere between 200 in the afternoons that are online from, well, literally all during the day. So it's not that it's new or that we need to do it when we go abroad. We can do that here. But I fully accept the fact that our infrastructure is not developed in the manner in which it should. I mean, for example, we talk about 4G technology, but every time I use my phone really tells me we vary between 3 and 4G on an ongoing basis. And in many places, you don't get connectivity at all. So that the issue of COVID has raised a broader point about how well integrated Trinidad is with the world from the point of view of the technology, and whether we are prepared to use the technology as a base platform for our own operations in Trinidad and Tobago. On a simple matter, the business school, for example, in order to convert ourselves to a fully online program, in the sense that people will not only do classes online, but also, for example, follow through in terms of matriculation as well as payment. And that was spoken to by Mr. Migu just now. We don't really have any domestic payment platform that integrates adequately with the international system. And in point of fact, the banking system is actually quite behind the 8 ball in that regard, so that the institutional arrangements for success are pretty poor. So the points that are being made by Mr. Migu with using a PayPal application or also a credit card application or having domestic links to the credit card application are correct. So for example, if you really wanted to shop in Trinidad and you didn't want to go anywhere, you couldn't use your card online. Or alternatively, there was a mechanism which allowed the operator, the business, to collect your payment. Invariably, it would have to be use a foreign platform, and you would probably be paying in the US. So it's a little ridiculous from that perspective. So that the issue of retooling also has to do with creating an environment in which we can seamlessly operate in a domestic space as well as integrate in a wider world platform. Now, sooner rather than later, this will happen whether we like it or not. We are not a technology giant. We're not going to lead in large measure. We are followers. But at the same token, we have to get accustomed and make our business processes seamless with international operations. I don't think that integrated supply chain management is going to go away, whether the Americans like it or not. It's just simply so well embedded as part of the world's distribution mechanism that is likely to remain a part of our existence, whether we have economic nationalism or not. And economic nationalism has so far shown itself, certainly from a technological point of view, in that a certain fear of the Chinese, but also a recognition that the Chinese probably have gone a lot further than their own firms. So that the issue isn't one of security. The issue is one of not business continuity either. The issue is that may lose out on the business opportunity, which they are more prepared to get than we are. So on that basis, it may make sense for us to delay them. So here is Trinidad and Tobago. And probably the one metaphor that we could use in terms of what the opportunity that faces us, or the opportunity that we are on the cusp of embracing, if we chose to so do, is the issue of the cell phone. Now, we will remember that in the recent past, 40 or 50 years ago, we had a problem with our major telecommunication company was known as what Telco Poops. We even have it as a calypso. And what cell phones have allowed us to do, in a sense, is to leapfrog the spaghetti of copper wire and leap into the 21st century. So, for example, many developing countries, in Africa in particular, never had to pass through that intermediate stage in terms of copper wire technology to get to telecommunication capacity. South Africa and Kenya are classic examples. And they have also developed platforms to allow for mobile payment using domestic mechanisms supported by the wireless technology. Kenya is a classic case in point, and the credit union movement, which allowed them to develop a payment system which didn't require an international platform. So it really is a question of how we adapt, and use technology. Now, Dr. Tiwari in his conversation mentioned or discussed the need for rethinking. But the real issue is not merely rethinking, but also conceptualizing how the changes are required, not only in terms of our geospatial location, but also in terms of how we do business between ourselves and how we adapt the technology. Because how we adapt the technology, in the first instance, creates value in the domestic community, and in the second instance, creates opportunity. And one of the specific issues that we have and that the country has faced are two, maybe three: leadership, management, and organization. Now, I'm intrigued by Denise Deming's use of Carnival as a possibility, in the sense that it has certain discipline orientations. You have a goal, you have a time frame to get A, B, and C done, but it's largely associated with enjoyment, as distinct from an output that can be harnessed or exported and or used in the sense of creating value. In fact, the people who probably come off best at Carnival time are the few entrepreneurs who have managed their business in such a way as to convert that sort of entertainment scenario into a package which people are prepared to pay for, and have simply laughed their way to the bank. Because one of the weaknesses of Carnival is that it ends on a Tuesday. And for all that productivity, for all that energy, the product is discarded, it's thrown away. It is not lasting. It is not converted, if you want, to a longer term investment. It is really a disposable product. Very much like the same plastic bottles and cups that we use on an ongoing basis, we throw it away. All right, it's finished, it's done, and we leave it alone. So that whilst there are lessons, the most important issue, to my mind, is in terms of one, the method of organization, and two, how does it help us to become a country which is operates more on from a point of view of sustainability and viability. That is the question. All right, the issue of sustainability and viability. And Dr. Tiwari's position and point with respect to rethinking and reformulation is a very important one. Because by and large, our entrepreneurs have not used Carnival, the example, as a method for generating a sustainable business. We do sufficiently well at Carnival, the entrepreneurs who are very well organized, that they generate a load of cash, which they do not use, for which they use to do other things. But the rest of the time, it's about planning for the next short season. Now, a business, if you're serious, is a 365-day activity which generates recurring revenue. And in that way, I think our community, about using the learning or the lesson to tie it into the business opportunities, is missed. And that is where I think that there's a lesson and there are learnings. And to follow through from that, the issue of sustainability and what we do, how we do it moving forward in the future. No country, no island of our size can survive without engaging with the rest of the world economy. And that's one of the reasons perhaps you'll find that there's always tended to be the concentration on some sort of primary product extraction as distinct from the value added. Quite apart from the metropolitan systems of exploitation that were developed. Because not only small countries went through that difficulty, big countries went through that issue too. India is a classic case. When the English got to India, they were responsible. India was responsible for about 24% of the world trade. Mr. Traore makes that point all the time in terms of his lectures. When the British were finished with India, they were down to 2. So the point is about retraining our thinking for sustainability, and how do we engage in a way with the rest of the world that makes sense and that adds value to Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, our economics has largely been geared to export. And when I say export, I mean export of everything, including people. So that whilst we may have had a very long education curve, you would find that the majority of our graduates in this region, I think the estimate is somewhere about 80% of the graduates eventually go abroad, and probably return, if they do return, in their retirement. And that's the ones who do come back. So the issue is not so much retooling, and retooling in a sense for the world economy. It is retooling in the sense of how do we make and establish the country as being a viable entity, a viable, sustainable entity. It is recognized that we will have to export to survive. But the issue is, what do we export and how do we get onto the intellectual part of business? So for example, all the time we knock the business community and we talk about the business about that the business community we are retail and distributive. Well, not too far from Trinidad and Tobago, and a country called Barbados, 300 nautical miles to the north, there is one businessman who operates internationally. He's a global businessman. There is nobody in the region who is richer than he is. None. And what did he build his business on? Well, distribution. Except that he used the distribution of an international platform in a small country. We think of him in the region as being big in Barbados. He's not big in Barbados. He's big in the world stage. But we've never understood the lesson. When we set up things like the offshore sector, we think that's about foreign people coming to invest. And the reality is that there are 2 kinds of money in this world: money that is taxed and money that is not taxed. And everybody is looking for a home where taxation is concerned. And that is increasingly one of the issues that we face. That's why we have low tax jurisdictions. And this is not a lesson that has not been lost on either America, England, or any other of the big countries. They too have low tax jurisdictions within the boundaries of their commercial system. So what is a Delaware corporation? And why are they formed in Delaware? Why are they formed in Phoenix? Those are all low tax jurisdictions. As is Ireland, a low tax jurisdiction within the European setting, as is Liechtenstein and a few other places as well to go with it. So that there are lessons to be learned. But we have to think of those lessons in the wider context, and we have to be careful how we limit ourselves. Mr. Kiffin Simpson, who I shall call by name now, is a businessman who formed a company called Inter-Americana Trading Corporation, which operates in Barbados. Its headquarters is based in Barbados at Warrens, a big building, but most of his business is done everywhere in the world. And when I met him in 1994, because I would have been his banker at the time, one of his bankers, he was selling 1,000 cars a day, except he wasn't selling them in Barbados, he was selling them in Latin America, because he had the agency for Suzuki in Latin America. In fact, he has the agency for many things in the Caribbean that we don't recognize. He has the largest BMW dealership of all places, not in Barbados, not in the US, but in China. He's used the double taxation treaties largely to his benefit. And that is simply that he sat down and rationalized and thought what he would do. So most people think of themselves as a business operating in one country. He is a business operating multi-jurisdictionally, but he's based in one country. He chooses to live in Barbados. He doesn't tell anybody his business story, and most people don't know it, right? But he's a true billionaire, and a billionaire not in the context of a Caribbean billionaire in the sense of Trinidad and Tobago dollars, but in terms of hard currency dollars. So that is an important lesson. And the important lesson is that we knock the whole idea of import and distribution well, and that is if you do your business in Trinidad and Tobago and you're only centered in the Trinidad and Tobago market. Why can't the rest of the world be our market? Now, that is a concept in terms of our entrepreneurial concept that we have to take on board. And we have to take it on board in the sense of how do we see ourselves integrating with the rest of the world? And we don't necessarily have to sell what we produce here. It is a question of what can we sell? All business is about selling. Every business can succeed or fail on the basis of its ability to sell. And he has taken on the position that he sells cars all across Latin America. He has the agency for a wide number of distribution agencies for a number of cars across Latin America. And that has made a considerable difference in terms of his method of operation. And because all of it is export oriented, it also is operating behind what is called a low tariff wall. If you operate in Trinidad and Tobago and you make $1 million, well, you pay the government 30%. In fact, anybody making above $1 million pays the government 30%. Operating behind the offshore window, his taxation rate is approximately 5 cents on the dollar. On average, it's probably a little lower than that. Well, think about the difference. It means that he has 25 more cents on every dollar that he makes that he could reinvest and do something else with. So it's a question of also how we reinterpret our business environment. And let me go back one step further. Dr. Tiwari talked about the concept of planning. And there's an important lesson to learn in this regard on how we do business. I'll give 2 stories, 3. The first one, when we were developing our 3rd 5-year development plan, the World Bank noted in its report on the plan in 1968 that it was meant to be accompanied by a manpower plan, what we would call a human resource plan. Moving forward, in terms of the skill sets that we would need and we would need to develop. Now that's 1968. 1968. Well, if I were to ask the Ministry of Planning or the Ministry of Labor, what are the estimated labor requirements moving forward in terms of the different areas and or the changing economic scenario of Trinidad and Tobago, and how many would we need to produce to maintain sustainability in area X or Y, or the areas which were considered to be the sectors of the future? Well, I doubt I'll be able to get an answer because I'm pretty certain there isn't any document that tells me that. So that means that whatever we were supposed to do in 1968, which is 52 years ago, we haven't done yet. So how are we going to approach the future? That's an important point, because the devil is in the details. It's all well and good to talk about the level of changes that we have to make. The issue is in terms of how we embrace them. And the 2 other examples is a conversation I had this afternoon with an entrepreneur, and one that I had with a former lecturer at UWI who currently works at the World Bank. And he was making the point that in terms of governance issues and business opportunities, that we sometimes miss the boat. The example that he gives is not one that is recorded anywhere. And one of our issues in terms of learning, in terms of education, is that we do not document our mistakes at public sector level, indeed at any level. And if you don't document the mistakes and use that as training tools for the new minds who are coming forward, if only to point out no decision is going to be the same from in year 1, year 2, or year 3. They're likely to be variants on a theme, but at least we could conceptualize what we needed to have done at any particular point in terms of addressing decisions. And the story works like this. A cruise ship company identified the fact that Trinidad and Tobago also had one of the best or largest slipways in the region and was considering headquartered its operations here in Trinidad. And it would use Trinidad as a sense of a home port. That idea was brought to a particular member of cabinet who brought it before the cabinet for discussion. The cabinet discussed it, and it was felt that it ought to have gone to tender. The minister who brought the idea said, but how could I bring their idea, which they have brought to us, and we're going to carry it out at tender? It's their idea. If anything at all, we should give them the opportunity to develop it. So the argument was whether it would have been fair to, in a sense, put somebody else's idea out to tender. Well, what do you think happened? Nothing. What do you think was the result? Nothing was the result. Absolutely nothing. Because we let the opportunity slide when we were talking about procurement issues. Business opportunities, if they're not grasped when they come and you find a way to work them out, invariably die. And there is the issue of equity. If somebody comes with a business idea, how could you take their idea and basically put it up for grabs? So it's a sensible point. But did we learn from that? Well, not necessarily, because the issue has been recently repeated. I will not give the details of that particular story, but suffice it to say, a business opportunity went a-begging again. Somebody came with an idea. It was thought that it should go out when the discussion with the public servants, not at cabinet level this time, at the idea at the level of the public servants who said that they should put the idea and they should put this opportunity out for tender. Well, guess what the person did? Just simply withdrew the idea. It's my idea. I'm not going to give you to give somebody else the idea, decide whether they could do it better than me or not. So how are we going to embrace business opportunities and the learning opportunities that come from those businesses in order to educate our next generation, the people who have to make Trinidad and Tobago more livable, make Trinidad and Tobago more successful? That is a critical retooling. It's a position of ideation. It's also a position of skills, but it's really also on what basis are we going to engage the world? Do we see Trinidad and Tobago as our little empire, or do we see Trinidad and Tobago our opportunity to make it an empire? And make it an empire or a home for an empire that is worldwide. And our conceptualization has been small. We've outgrown CARICOM. CARICOM, in a sense, is now too small for us. The wider world is the new world of Latin America, which is always close by, which is one of the reasons why Eric Williams, at the beginning, wanted to make certain that all Trinidadians who went to secondary school had a second language. The idea was that they would be able to converse and that we would be further ahead at this stage than the people who lived in the areas around us. So we'd then be able to exploit business opportunities. At the moment, there are only 2 firms or 3 in Trinidad and Tobago who have that view. Now, interestingly, neither of the 2 entrepreneurs and or businessmen who lead those operations went to a university. Neither of the 2 of them did. But at the same token, they have a much broader idea and a much better understanding of what they need to do to make their business successful, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but elsewhere in the region. That is the context in which retooling has to take place. The retooling is not merely only about skill sets. Skill sets are things that we can manipulate, things that we can learn. The issue is, how do we engage with the rest of the world as this think of seeing ourselves as an island? And I have to say to you, the businessmen who are internationally successful from the Caribbean, that is how they have conceptualized their engagement with the rest of the world. So that it is not merely about the skill sets and retooling in the sense of whether I'm good at technology or otherwise. It's a question on what basis am I going to engage the world from a business perspective. And if that is what we have to talk about, or that is what we have to do, then we also have to talk about the institutions that will foster such an approach. And I will end my contribution on that note. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Brown. Okay, so now everybody, we will begin our question and comment portion of this conversation. And I'd like to begin by inviting Dr. Hussein to ask his question. Dr. Hussein.
Hi, good night. My predominant question really hovers around what is the retooling towards? In other words, what type of medium-term economy do we view? Because if we continue along a business as usual line, we would have one form of retooling. if it is we are cognizant of the foreign exchange situation and its rapid depletion, we would have another type of retooling. And how do we embrace within all of this the fact that we may have on our shores 40,000 able-bodied Spanish-speaking immigrants that could help to increase the density of trade with South America by far above what we currently experience. So I would just start to talk with that and then ask other things later on. And I am directing that at Dr. Tiwari.
Excuse me, Dr. Tiwari, you will have to unmute your microphone. Okay, thank you. Dr. Tiwari, you asked.
Can you hear me now?
Great. Yes, we're hearing you now. Thank you.
All right. Hello, Roger. Thanks for the question. Well, the first thing I would say is that it can't be business as usual. I think we knew that a long time ago before COVID, but we have done nothing because we had we took the view that unless we were, it seems to me that we took the view unless we were forced to change, we would carry on as usual for as long as possible, and we would change as minimally as we needed to. And I think that that has been unfortunate, but it's over, it's gone. And now we don't have an alternative. I mean, we have to do something differently. I take your point about the foreign exchange. I think the minimum requirements for us are, one, you've got to find a way of producing things that allow us to save foreign exchange. Agriculture comes readily to mind, but if I could just piggyback on the rethinking and reformulating and reconceptualization issue that I initially raised and that Mariano talked a little bit about, I think that we need to look at agriculture as one element of a possible range of things, and then begin to do that looking at the economy and the society and the markets around us in a systemic way, and then building the organizational capability that is required, because that is important to allow us to capitalize on the opportunity in a very integrated and well-connected way. So that is for the savings of foreign exchange issue. And then for the earning of foreign exchange, I mean, we are in a mess. I mean, we may say how well we are doing in terms of how much reserves we have and how well the HSF did in spite of the fact that we took money out of it. But the truth of the matter is that with each passing month and each passing year, you have to make up your mind to rely less and less on oil, notwithstanding the fines that we have by Touchstone and BHP, etc., and build a new economy in two ways. One is a diversified economy that builds a platform for foreign exchange earnings, and we could start with what we have: manufacturing, markets, exports, niches, etc., partnerships that we need to make in order to do that. But we also have to have new investment for diversification. So Kirk raised the issue of methanol being a raw product that nobody exports. That's why we became the big exporter. And because everybody else uses methanol to make something else. Now we have an opportunity for that with the Mitsubishi Massey project, because two of the things that they are doing is providing some methanol here for local manufacturing, and they are also converting to DME, and that gives us more opportunities as well. Massey went into that project because they saw the opportunity of building a manufacturing capability that was non-existent here up to this point. So I think things like that, we need to capitalize on, look at what we have and see how we can capitalize on those things for export of foreign exchange. But the other issue is that we have to build a new economy. You know, we have climate change issues. We are islands. We live among island nations. And you have a planet in jeopardy. And we also require a climate change response for self-sustainability and viability of so many things, including any possibility of long-term sustainable tourism. And that means that we've got to build a different economy. We've got to build a new economy. So, climate change is one, sustainable development issues are another. Coastal zone and the ocean-related matters are critical. I mean, we have more water around us than we have land on which we live. So that is another matter. But there is a science, a technology. There are partnerships involved. There is knowledge involved. There is research. There is capacity that has to be built. There is organization and management and leadership that are required. And one of the problems with us is that we don't, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but this is a society for which the evidence tells us that we don't think through anything. We think for the moment, we think for the politics, we think for the next election, we think for what is the current issue or trend, we think for the investor who comes, we think of what is the crisis that we need to address now, but we do not think through things in a way that is meaningful. And I feel that we don't have a choice now. COVID has put us in a situation where everybody has to rethink, even if they didn't want to do it before. And it's not that we cannot rethink, because, I mean, to make a connection with the carnival idea that Denise raised, I mean, carnival is something that we created. Steel band is something that we created. The steel pan, the innovations with steel pan, pan jazz and sitar and pan and so on. Those are things that we innovated. The question is, how do you take it from these issues and these levels and transfer it in a diversified way to other projects for which we bring solutions? And really, I want to say, and I want to make this point seriously, you cannot do anything or anything well unless you begin with the thinking. You cannot have a person thinking in a room by themselves and coming up with an idea. Thinking requires engagement. Thinking and engagement requires collaboration. It means the willingness to be open. It means that the willingness to modify. It means the opportunity to allow for more creativity. And we've got to be able to do those things. I don't think that we have a chance in hell unless we are prepared to do these things in the society. The problem that we have is that we have political systems that manifest authoritarian structures. We have a culture of politics that is authoritarian and undemocratic in culture, although it pretends to be so in form. And you have an education system that does not really become engaged with the rest of the society. You cannot have education not connected to other educators and other researchers out in the world. You cannot have education that is not connected by the research to the community or to the business. You cannot have research related to humans and people and not understand how work systems operate, what unions are thinking. All right, you cannot do these things without being connected and engaged in the society. And we really need to build a collaborative, engaged, mutually respectful society. And the leaders are very bad examples of this in Trinidad and Tobago. And unless you have a revolution of culture by people who put themselves in a position to create that revolution, we are only going to be able to make very small gains in narrow areas, and we are not going to be able to well up the creativity that is required for the solution. First of all, the problem identification and the solution finding that is necessary to do the things that we need to do. And the things we need to do are simple. We have to earn money in the world by selling things to people, whether those are ideas, whether those are projects, whether those are goods that we create, whether those are things that we invite people to do here. The second thing is that we have to produce more of what we consume and to change the taste, the habits, the patterns of behavior to allow this to be so enjoyable that when others come here, they carry the idea of the value of what we have with them, adding to the greater exports. And I mean, we just have to do these things. And we need to connect with the world with where the world is headed. The world is headed into digitization. It is headed into artificial intelligence. It is headed into technology-driven innovation. And we could do some of that, or we could import it and deploy it. Denise was mentioning something just now, and I want to say a word about it. And that has to do with the issue of the technology and the fact that, you know, she couldn't even get on the telephone unless she made special arrangements. I don't see how we're going to get into public service digitization and a national digitization project in this country unless we basically question and rethink the role of TAT in this society. Secondly, TSTT is a problem. Right now, I do not have a home phone. I have called TSTT 3 times. Each time they promised to get back to me in 24 hours. And they are converting now from landlines to wireless in your home. All right? But they cannot do it for my home, and they will not tell me anything about it. We cannot have that in Trinidad and Tobago in 2020. I don't know what is the role of Digicel, and we need to reconfigure all of these things. I don't know what is the role of Huawei, Green Dot, how the system is opening up, what is the enabling environment, what is the competitive requirements, etc. And unless we can have a discussion about that, we can't talk about digitization. What do you think digitization is a work? It depends on technology. You need resources, you need infrastructure in order to build on that. And Mariano is right. There are 2 elements of the infrastructure. How do you create the system in which Trinidad and Tobago has the capacity to communicate itself and do all the things that it wants to within its borders? All right, so it's conduct its national business internally. And how do you connect with the rest of the world system to be able to do the things that are important to do to you and what you have to do and what you need to do? I mean, these are critical. And I am saying that the problem is thinking. The problem starts with thinking. And if you cannot think your way through to identify what the problems are, and if you do not have the openness to understand that you can't do that by coming up with an idea in a political meeting or in a cabinet, or if you don't understand that you need to bring people together to collaborate, to co-think the process through, and to come up with the best idea, and then set up systems to be able to do it, leadership, management, organization, systems, structures, focus on results that you are trying to achieve and the processes that would get you there. How are you going to do anything? There is too much backward thinking in
Dr. Tiwari? Sorry, you were muted
Yes.
for a moment. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, is the backward thinking that exists at the top, at the level of leadership, where action of a certain kind is required in order to create the enabling environment to make something happen. So I will stop at that point. But to get back to the basic question of Roger, we need to save foreign exchange. We need to earn foreign exchange. We need to save it with what we can do at home to make ourselves as self-sufficient as possible. We need to earn it with by building on what we have and developing those by whatever means necessary. But we also need new investment, new diversification, focused on what is happening in the world that we need to do for sustainability, and focus on where the technology is carrying the world that we need to get on board with. And all of this has to be buttressed by a knowledge sector. That knowledge sector has to be research and education that is aligned to strategic objectives for development.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Dr. Tiwari. Okay, so the tourism and hospitality sector, one of our audience members writes, has experienced a dramatic declines in revenue. And he asks, what measure can be used to retool this sector? So that's the first question. I'm going to give the panelists 2 more, and then I will allow you all to answer. Second, Mr. Ramnath writes, as it relates to retooling with the immigration of Venezuelan migrant labor, should TNT use this opportunity to incorporate Spanish as a second language with the aim of exploiting market opportunities in Latin America? So that's question number 2. And the third question is also on Venezuelan migrant labor. Should TNT implement policies and initiatives to channel this growing segment of the labor force to export-oriented activities such as manufacturing and agriculture? All right. Okay, so the first question as it relates to tourism, I will just put that to Ms. Deming.
Thank you very much. Fantastic question. Before we can even think through the tourism product, we have to focus on us. I'll give you a very simple example. We talk about the world should come here because we have opportunities with regard to our approaches to festivals, our approach to food. We should make ourselves the party capital of the world. But before we do any of that, we need to instill the pride in people so that we clean the place. You can't invite a tourist here in a dirty place, and we have a dirty place. So we have to spend a lot of time on self-analysis and understanding what drives us before we can move to what is the product that the world needs. Right now, Trinidad and Tobago needs leadership that makes us feel as if we can make a difference. We don't have that. And until we have that, I think we are going to continue with the criminal spiral, with the corruption spiral, with all of those negative things. You may feel that what I have been saying is soft and I can't put my fingers around it. I can't say what the figures will be, but when people feel proud in themselves, the creativity will emerge. So the tourism thing is, let's start with us being visitors to our own land, caring for this land, removing the plastics, stop nastying the place, looking at how we could conserve things. Look at how we could plant 2 bitter saive in a pot outside your window. You know, so it's not, there's no magic bullet. And for us to do anything, we need to collaborate to find what the vision is. And to me, that vision has to be a more humane society. If we could score on that vision, we'll score on everything else. I may not have answered your questions, but that's my answer.
But could I say a point on that?
Yes.
In response to Denise, I mean, you talk about, I don't think it has to do with vision. I think it has to do with the point I was making in regard to, we need to get at a more basic level about organization. So whilst we're on this whole digitization kick, let me just make a point. In Japan, they don't allow computers in school until kind of, if you want, undergraduate level. They focus on getting, how shall we call it, about the socialization and discipline process, which is the point, essentially the point that Denise is making. So here's the issue, and how you live and embed a culture in a system. And my understanding of this comes from a daughter of a teacher in Trinidad and Tobago who lectured to teachers and is taught teachers at the School of Education. And his daughter is now teaching in Japan as part of an extension system. Couple points. In terms of the school system, coming into school, they spent the first 2 or 3 days not studying, not opening a book, just simply getting the discipline structures right, getting to class on time, getting from class to the assembly in a particular order, in a particular manner. It was drilled. Literally, the first week of school was about getting those basics right and making them responsible for cleaning their environment. Well, that's one of the reasons why the Japanese are meticulously clean, because it's built into the school program and it's built in to what they do. And no IT involved in this. This is a question of simple routines. Simple routines. We don't want a computer in school, and we don't want a computer in school until, if you want, somewhere about undergraduate level, at a much higher level. For the very simple reasons about socialization, it's about reinforcing the basics. This idea that we have digital learning at every level and at every age, they're interested in that. The first order of business is getting the discipline structures right. Now, I want to use that as an example, and it's reinforced. If you were to go to a cocktail party, and they serve you hors d'oeuvres and so on, and normally you look around for a place to dump the little bowl or the little toothpick or the napkin and so on. You'll find none. For the simple reason is that garbage is yours. You gotta carry it home. We're not putting any bins for you. Right? No bins in the street. You have to be personally responsible for that. So the point I'm making is this. It is not a matter of a vision or conversation. It is a matter of, well, maybe it might be a matter of how we start off with a vision, but the point is how it is embedded and the discipline structures that support it, not merely in one window or in a little window, but all the way through the system. It's systemic. That's the important point. It is not that we don't have, so that the issue of behavior of people throwing the snack pack out the window or the garbage pack and they throw it into the bin and we have no recycling capacity. There's a reason why there's a recycling market, or what Japan sells secondhand cars. Is the largest source of secondhand cars in the world for the very simple reason their pristine beauty of their island is not to be tarnished with any old car dump or dumps. So take the cars and get rid of them. Send them somewhere else. Send them to all the other countries in the world that want to have cars. And you can, to buy a car in Japan, you don't have to have a license, you know. You have to prove that you have a parking space. First order business, organization, where you going to put the car? Why? Because it's a dense society. They have a public transportation policy, right? So that people who are buying cars have to demonstrate they have a place to put the car. And when you buy the car comes with a maintenance agreement, a warranty. When that warranty is up, that's where all our imported used cars are coming from, because the warranty is up and they're not bothering to replace the warranty. We'll buy a new car, take the car and export it. Somebody else will get it. Imported used cars, that's how it works. So that the issue of maintaining my environment, the issue of retooling, I just want to marry the point which was made by Dr. Tiwari at the beginning. He talks about re-education. I buy that, right? I just want to demonstrate what it means in practical terms for discipline and organization. It has to work its way through the system. You're not going to get people who are oriented, who all of a sudden are going to become conscious of the environment if it was not inculcated in a systemic way right through the level of the school. Right? And that's when our concept of schooling has to do with we're bright and whether we pass in exams. Their concept of schooling has to do with socialization process. Right? So if we want to start talking about retooling and we want to talk about objective, that's the kind of retooling we have to talk about. That's just my little 2 cents to add to the point that Madam Denning, you were making.
I'd like to add just a little thing there.
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
While I don't disagree with Mariano that these systems and policies are important, I do think that Denise was trying to point to something much deeper. Because I mean, you could just look at the difference between Tobago and Trinidad. Tobago is so much cleaner, and I don't think it's because they have a more systemic policy about cleaning. I think that there is something deeply wrong psychologically and culturally, which I think she keeps pointing to, and rightly so. You know, and that this is a very, very, very difficult question.
I would challenge that assertion.
All right. Well, but that I will. But I do think that she's pointing to something extremely deep-seated, a problem about the Trinidad psyche that I'm not unsolvable, but I'm saying it needs to be recognized, and I agree with her, and I think she keeps pointing to that over and over again, rightly so. I just wanted to put that there.
But here's the point I was making. I don't disagree with the point that she's made, you know, and I accept the point with psyche. The point I'm making, if we're talking about retooling and get to change the society, we're talking about retooling. I am saying that the retooling has to be very basic, has to be its conceptualization and how it becomes part and parcel of your learning on an ongoing basis. And it starts at the kindergarten level, at the early childhood learning centers, and works its way through the system. And that's one of the reasons, if you want to talk about retooling from that perspective, Finland and Korea make the point that they pay their teachers, but they also expect a certain level of output and commitment in terms of what their teachers do. So I'll just leave it on that note.
Can I just make a contribution here? And I accept what Mariano is saying, but if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a vision of how you see the place, then all those systems and structures won't work. So you have to start off with, how do we see ourselves? And I keep focusing on that our leaders. I'll give you a horrible example. I have been told that 2 parliamentarians recently bought one bought a Benz and one bought a Range Rover. This is at a time when we are talking about changing the beneficial tax interests that they have. What is the message they are sending to us? We are struggling. We don't know where we are going, but you want a Benz and a Range Rover? That is the self-hate that is bubbling up and is parading itself in our parliament. Every time you look at the parliament channel, somebody cussing somebody else. That is self-hate. And if we don't put the research into understanding why are we doing these things, we will not get anywhere. Any of the structures you put in place, by the time the child leaves school and comes back into the environment, they've gone back. There has been some recidivism and they've gone back to whatever the negative behaviors are. There's no consequence for throwing garbage out your window. There's no consequence for, recently, we do it on a VAPSI basis. Recently, the police in St. James charging people for parking in the opposite direction or parking in the opposite direction. That's an old law. So you've allowed the law to carry on, people break it, you have allowed the chaos, and then you want to punish people. I am saying we need to rethink what's the kind of society we want to see. How will we treat our neighbors? And then we can start to think of what are the systems, structures, processes we need to put in place to support that greater vision. If we don't have that greater vision, we're wasting time.
Thank you very much for your contribution there, Ms. Deming. A truly rich and intriguing discussion this evening. So now we would just like to invite our panelists to give their closing remarks. And we will start with Mr. Mariano Brown. Mr. Brown?
Right. Very simple. And I take the point that Denise makes, and I was just simply saying that we have to embed it. You know, they talk about forming habits, form good habits and make them your masters. So that you have to embed it. And what I'm saying is that generally speaking, our conversation, we are not committed to anything. We say a lot of things, but we're not committed to it, because commitment is demonstrated by the things that we do on a routine basis. And if we recognize this is an existential moment for Trinidad and Tobago, and it is, we therefore, in terms of addressing our future, need to operate at a much more basic level in terms of the changes that we have to make. And that is where we have to influence the policymakers to make those sort of nuts and bolts changes at the level of literally almost everything that we do. And our success in business is simply a mirror image of the success that we will have not in our school systems, as well as in terms of what we practice at home. Business is also about a culture in terms of getting it right. And one of the reasons why we have more types of one person in business is because we have more people who are involved in it, and they talk about it. They talk about it at the dinner table. They talk about it in terms of what they do, and their children grow up thinking in that way. So it's cultural, it's habitual, it's habit forming. Therefore, it's about systems and routines. And we have to embed those systems in our schools, and we have to embed them elsewhere in terms of our homes. I take Dr. Tiwari's point and the point made by Denise that it also starts with ideation. But that also requires leadership to get the message across in terms of the changes that we have to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Megu to give his closing remarks. Dr. Megu.
Thank you. I suppose one thing I would say is that we have needed retooling since 1962, since we became independent, and we have not done it yet. Hopefully, this disaster which we're facing will help us do so. We faced many disasters in the past, and we still have not retooled as necessary. I hope this does not become another lost opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Megu. Ms. Deming, your closing remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting me to spend my Friday afternoon. It's a lovely opportunity. I want to say to Dr. Mayhew, I think you've hit the nail on the head that we should have been retooling since 1962, and we have not done so. So here's an opportunity. And I want to go back to when a Trinidadian reaching the place is niceness. Other people believe that we need to create the niceness and believe in it and make that difference. And I want to refer to another Calypsonian, na leaving. I don't care what happened, na leaving. So I will continue to poke wherever I can to make a difference. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're most welcome, and thank you very much for your contribution and participation. And finally, we'd like to invite Dr. Tiwari to give his closing remarks. Dr. Tiwari. Sorry, Dr. Tiwari, we'll have to ask you to unmute your microphone, please.
Yes, okay. I want to thank you, moderator, for the opportunity to express my views here with these very, very able colleagues this evening. I thought it was a very rich discussion. And I want to thank Dr. Roger Hussein for making that possible through the TDU. A couple of quick things. The Venezuelan question I didn't answer, but I'll just quickly say, the Venezuelans could either be a liability or asset. We need to make them an asset. They have real skills, I think, that can make a difference in agriculture, in services, and possibly when the COVID pandemic is over and the world begins to open up in tourism with Latin America, in terms of technical capacity that we can build here to tap that market. And I want to say that the Venezuelan opportunity, if we see it as an opportunity, should help us to think a little bit about how we rationalize the population issues that I mentioned very early in the group, in the session, and also how we need to expand our population. We have a birth rate of about 20,000 a year. We have a rate of growth of the population at 0.5. I think we need to figure out, well, if post-COVID we are going somewhere and we know where that destination is likely to be, how many people, not just how many skills, but how many people do we need to get us to the GDP level, the quality of life level, the sustainability level that we need. So I would say that the Venezuelan thing is an asset situation that we need to capitalize on and gives us an opportunity for rethinking something. I want to say that the soft issues that Denise raised, I mean, I don't think there's any need at all to treat them as soft issues only, because they are not isolated from the other issues that we are concerned about. And I think the soft issues are very important. I mean, how you treat with people, how you engage people, how you create the conditions for collaboration, for cooperation, for the spirit of getting things done, for the joy of work. I think those are very, very important things. And she is right to look at the cultural sphere as something that we can draw on. But again, I think we need to appreciate what we have and what we've been able to create and achieve, and see how we can transfer that into more value-adding opportunities. And I just want to close on this issue. We mentioned Tobago, but we didn't talk about it a lot. I just want to say this. I mean, Tobago is an island of 60,000 people. The fundamental question is this: what will it take to make Tobago a self-sustaining island economy, eco-friendly, and sustainably developed, well connected to Trinidad and engaged in the Trinidad and Tobago society, and well connected with the rest of the world to help it derive its income from sources outside the world? And I believe that that is a question, I mean, it's a simple question. It requires a complex set of answers, but not difficult answers. It really means thinking it through, you know, and working through the problems. I mean, if we can't solve the problem for 60,000 people on a gorgeous island like that, of self-sustainability, how are we going to deal with anything else in Trinidad and Tobago? So I want to say that Tobago is an example waiting, an opportunity of an example waiting to be created, an example of an opportunity waiting to be created. And it certainly does not lie in the kind of structures that we've put down politically, constitutionally, etc. Only, I think it really calls for something much more strategic, something much more in the realm of reformulation, and something much more aligned to a mix between or a mix among ecological and environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and really value creating in terms of industrial components, but I'm using that word loosely. I don't mean heavy industry. Industrial components that you need to lead and manage and organize in order to make that island a really thriving place that does not lose its capacity for leisure and a sort of what you might call an easy involvement with the society. And I believe that we have a test case there that we might usefully address. So I want to leave with that, because I think that the future, in spite of the horrible nature of COVID, is still hopeful. And I feel that we do have the capacity to think our way through. I think in spite of the many mistakes that we've made, there are lots of things that we've created that are of immense value, but we do not appreciate them. Perhaps we don't understand them well enough, and we have never really sought to tap them. And I believe that this COVID time is the opportunity for Trinidad and Tobago. I want to agree with Cook that if we miss this opportunity, I think we will have missed the most important opportunity. So thank you very much.
Dr. Tiwari, and to the rest of the panel, thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. On behalf of the TEDU, we want to encourage this level of conversation to continue. We at the university believe that this is one of our main responsibilities, to continually put information in the public domain so it creates a kind of catch a fire conversation nationally. It's important for our participants, it's important for our nation, it's important for institutions across Trinidad and Tobago to become involved. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I want to say on behalf of Dr. Roger Hussein and the entire TEDU team, thank you so much. Do have a pleasant night. Stay safe, sanitize, wear your masks, and look out for our invites for the next conversation in 2 weeks' time. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Kamala, what is the problem?